Welcome to the Airbnb Superhost Secrets podcast, where we dive deep into the art and science of becoming a top-rated host. Today, we're tackling a common host headache:
Yeah.
guests leaving items behind.
Oh, yeah.
It's like we're running a lost and found service on top of everything else.
Right. It's like a never-ending scavenger hunt. You never know what you'll find. One time I found a vintage record player left behind. It was like from the 70s.
Wow, that's a pretty cool find, actually.
It was, but still, it's not really what we signed up for, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
So let's get practical. How can we prevent these lost and found situations in the first place? I mean, a friendly reminder to double-check for belongings seems obvious, but are there any other, pro tips you can share?
I think a lot of it has to do with making things really visible for guests. One host I know created like a forget-me-not corner
Okay.
right by the exit with a funny sign. Guests can put anything they find there. They even stocked it with sticky notes for people to leave a message for the forgetful owner.
Oh, that's really clever. It's practical and adds a little personality, too.
Right. It makes it fun.
Now, what about those signs that say, not responsible for lost items?
Yeah.
Do they actually work, or do they just create a less welcoming vibe?
It's a tricky one. You want to be hospitable, but also protect yourself. So one thing you could do is include a clear statement about handling lost items in your house rules. Maybe frame a copy and display it prominently.
That's a good point. It's hard to miss that.
Right.
Okay, so let's say a guest does leave something behind. What's the best way to handle it?
Communication is key. Reach out to the guest immediately. Airbnb's messaging system is good for this because it's all documented there. Just let them know you found their item and ask if they want it back.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, here's a question that always trips me up. Shipping costs. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense to ship a $5 item across the country. How do you deal with that?
You are so right. Your time and money are valuable. You can always offer to hold on to the item for a bit, in case they're local or someone can pick it up. And if the guest really wants it back, well, then just be upfront about those shipping costs.
Makes sense.
You can even use that Airbnb Resolution Center to handle the payment. It keeps everything transparent and organized.
Okay, so we've covered prevention and communication,
Yeah.
but let's get real.
Yeah.
Sometimes shipping just isn't feasible.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a bulky item, something perishable, or just something of very little value. What then?
Right, right. So in those cases, it's totally okay to set a clear policy in your house rules about what you'll do with those low-value items. For example, you might say that after a certain holding period, you'll donate those items to a local charity.
Oh, that's a great idea. That takes the pressure off of us to store everything.
Exactly. It just simplifies things.
Now, I've heard some hosts use a finders keepers approach
Oh.
for certain items. Is that a good idea? Or could it cause trouble?
I'd say it's a bit of a gray area. To be on the safe side, it's always best to try and reunite guests with their belongings, even if it seems as something they wouldn't miss.
Yeah, you never know what might have sentimental value.
Exactly. Now, here's a little pro tip, especially for those items that are tricky to ship. Before you even think about packaging, take clear photos of the item, include a ruler for scale, write out detailed descriptions. It can help avoid any disputes later on if the guest claims the item is damaged or not what they expected.
Smart move. Documentation is definitely key in these situations.
For sure.
This has been so helpful. I feel much more prepared to handle any lost and found situation now.
Me too. Remember, clear communication, upfront policies, a little creativity can go a long way.
Absolutely. So we've tackled the lost and found challenge, but there's another Airbnb hurdle that's a bit more intimidating.
Uh-oh, I think I know what's coming next.
That's right. Dealing with those, let's just say, challenging guests.
Oh, yeah. Those are the ones that can really test your patience.
And your Superhost skills.
For sure.
But that's a conversation for next time.
All right, so let's say you've searched everywhere, high and low, you've checked every nook and cranny, but that missing item is still MIA. What do you do then?
I can imagine these situations can be so stressful for both the host and the guest.
Absolutely. You want to be helpful, but, you also don't want to get caught up in a false claim.
Right, exactly. So how do you even approach that?
Well, the key here, like in so many hosting situations, is clear communication.
Okay.
Right from the start. When a guest reports a missing item, acknowledge their concern. Let them know you'll investigate thoroughly.
So don't just immediately jump to, I've checked everywhere and it's not here.
Right, exactly. Give yourself some breathing room to do a proper search. You never know, it might turn up in the most unexpected place.
Oh, yeah. I've heard stories of things turning up in the vacuum cleaner filter or tucked away in a linen closet. It's always worth double checking.
Always worth double checking. And while you're searching, remember documentation is your best friend. Take photos of the areas you've checked, make notes of anything unusual, keep a record of all communication with the guest. It's all about covering your bases.
Makes sense. That way you're protected if things get complicated.
Exactly. Now, let's say you've done a thorough search and the item is still missing. How do you break the bad news to the guest?
Yeah. How do you do that without sounding dismissive or, like, accusatory?
Well, this is where empathy comes in. When you communicate with the guest, express your understanding of their frustration, but reiterate that you've done a comprehensive search. But unfortunately, you haven't been able to locate the item.
So something like, I understand this is frustrating. I personally checked, mentioned specific areas, and I haven't been able to find item name. Sometimes items are misplaced or, maybe accidentally packed. It's possible that happened here.
Exactly. You're acknowledging their feelings, you're validating your efforts, and you're leaving the possibility open.
Okay, I like that. Now, what about those guests who insist they left the item behind, even though you're certain it's not there? How do you handle those conversations?
Those are tough. You want to be helpful, but you also need to protect yourself. So I always refer back to the house rules. You know, those rules we talked about earlier, they should clearly state your policy on lost items.
Right.
And you might even consider adding a clause that says you're not responsible for valuables left behind, and encourage guests to use the safe or lockbox if you provide one.
Good point. That sets clear expectations from the start.
Exactly. Now, if a guest becomes insistent or accusatory, remember to stay calm and polite but firm. Reiterate your policy, remind them you've conducted a thorough search, and if they're still not satisfied, suggest they file a claim with their travel insurance if they have it.
That makes sense. It's a good reminder that as hosts, we're running a business. We have to set boundaries.
Absolutely. And if the situation feels really tricky or if the missing item is particularly valuable, don't hesitate to reach out to Airbnb's support team. They're amazing at dealing with these types of situations.
Yeah, they have a lot of experience. It's good to know they're there to help.
Always. Okay, ready to tackle the next challenge.
Oh boy, what's next?
Let's talk about those guests that, well, sometimes make us wonder why we do this.
The difficult guests.
You got it.
Okay, so we've talked about preventing lost items. We've talked about dealing with those tricky lost item claims. And now we're facing what feels like the ultimate Airbnb boss battle. Difficult guests.
You know, it's funny. No matter how carefully you screen guests, how amazing your property is, every host will encounter a difficult guest at some point.
It's like it's just part of the game.
It is. But the good news is, with the right approach, you can actually minimize the stress and really maximize your chances of a positive outcome.
Okay, so let's turn our listeners into those difficult guest-whispering superhosts. What's the first step?
Setting those expectations right from the start. Like, think of it as laying down the law of the land.
Okay, the Airbnb law. I like that.
Exactly. Your house rules, those are your secret weapon. They should outline, like, everything. Noise levels, guest limits, smoking, pets, checkout procedures, you name it.
And don't be afraid to get specific, right?
Oh, absolutely. The more detailed, the better.
Okay.
Because the more detailed those rules are, the less room there is for any misunderstanding. Like, instead of just saying no parties, say no loud gatherings after 10 p.m.
Right, because party can mean different things to different people.
Exactly.
So we've written these amazing house rules. How do we actually make sure people read them?
Make them impossible to miss.
Okay.
You know, include them in your welcome binder, post them on the fridge, frame them, put them on the wall. Some people even make little videos outlining the rules or fun infographics, and they send them to guests before they arrive.
Oh, that's a great idea.
It can be fun, right?
Yeah, and to make sure people pay attention. Okay, so our house rules are locked and loaded. What's the next step in our difficult guest prevention plan?
Guest screening.
All right.
This is where you really get to, do a little detective work.
Okay, so what are we looking for? What are the red flags?
Take your time, review their profile, read their reviews from other hosts, see if anything seems off. Like, are there complaints about noise? about cleanliness, about communication, anything that makes you go,
Okay.
Or maybe, they have requests that seem kind of unreasonable or that clash with your house rules.
Right.
Like maybe they want to check in super late when you have strict quiet hours, or they try to sneak in extra guests.
And if something feels off, you really have to trust your gut.
Trust your gut, absolutely. It's better to decline a booking if you have any doubts than to deal with a potential nightmare later.
I agree. Okay, so we've set clear expectations. We're screening guests like pros. But sometimes those difficult guest situations just happen.
They do.
How do we handle those moments of truth?
Communication, communication, communication. As soon as you notice an issue, whether it's a noise complaint, property damage, anything that's bothering you, address it immediately and professionally.
So don't just hope it goes away on its own.
No, don't let things fester. Because really, the longer you wait, the more likely the situation will escalate. Reach out to them directly, whether it's through a phone call, a text, Airbnb messaging, whatever's fastest.
And I imagine the tone we use is important here.
So important. Like, even if you're frustrated, stay calm, stay collected, stay professional. The goal is to resolve the issue, not make it worse.
So no passive-aggressive notes on the counter.
Definitely not. Instead, use those I statements. It helps express your concerns without sounding like you're accusing them. Like, instead of saying you're being too loud, you can say, I'm a little concerned about the noise level. It's getting a bit late, and I want to be mindful of other guests or neighbors.
Right. That makes sense.
And it might sound obvious, but, sometimes we forget. It's really important to listen to the guest's perspective. There might be a misunderstanding or a reason for their behavior. Like maybe they didn't realize the walls were so thin, or there's a family emergency.
So before we jump to any conclusions, take a moment to really understand their side of the story.
Exactly. Now, if you've communicated, you've tried to find a solution, but their behavior's still disruptive, well, that's when you call in the Airbnb support team.
Okay.
They're available 24/7. They can help mediate, document the issue, offer advice.
So they really are like the Airbnb superheroes.
Exactly. And if necessary, they can even remove the guest from your property.
Wow, that's great to know.
It is.
Yeah.
You're not alone in this. They're there to support you, protect you. You don't have to tolerate disruptive behavior.
This is so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly feel so much more confident about dealing with these situations now.
Me too. Remember, clear communication, enforcing your house rules, and a little bit of empathy go a long way.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot today.
Ugh.
From those forgotten treasures to those challenging guests. And, I have to say, I'm feeling way more prepared for whatever comes my way.
Me too.
Thanks for tuning in to the Airbnb Superhost Secrets podcast. We'll be back next week with more tips and strategies to help you rock your hosting game.
Happy hosting, everyone.
See you next time.